Let's talk about the 3 ways to actually get there, now that we've got a sense of why we should even be considering it. The first entry point, and this is the one that there's the largest uptake around, is the second-year summer associate recruit. This is the most common pathway for Canadian students to get to New York with the highest likelihood of success. The 2L Summer Associate Recruit occurs at the same time that the Canadian 2L Summer Recruit does, which is between 1L and 2L. It's in that summer, when you've ended your first year set of exams and before you start your 2L year in September. As mentioned previously, this year, the portals are opening for New York applications in May, and the whole recruitment process will be done by late July, early August. If you are in a 4-year joint degree program like the JD MBA, your technical 2L summer is actually between 2L and 3L. So if you have 4 years, then it's not the summer between 1L and 2L. It's the summer between 2L and 3L, assuming you have a 4L year. The thing to remember about New York as well is, unlike the Canadian recruitment process, there is no oversight body. There is no law society, provincial law society governing the timelines around which applications open and close around, or governing the interview timeline or interview week. It's the Wild West when it comes to New York. Firms will independently decide when they have opened up their portals. They'll independently decide how many offers to hand out, and they will close off their application and recruitment process whenever they are finished. Students are also hired on a rolling admission basis. So the earlier you apply, the higher the chance you have of getting hired is. Once a firm extends all of its available offers, students will typically have 2 to 4 weeks to give a response, about 21 days on average, to reply to a firm. Once the firm has received a set number of confirmations, yes, I accept your offer, they will close out any further offers being given. So last year, for example, Skadden, one of the top firms in New York, finished their entire summer associate recruitment process by the end of June. So anyone who was hoping to apply in July was simply cut out. It doesn't matter how good they were. If the timing doesn't work and all the offers have already been given out and accepted, that admission or recruitment process is closed for the firm. So you want to get your application materials in as early as possible, ideally mid-May this year. So how do you apply? There are a couple ways to do it. You can either email human resources or legal talent, and I'll explain how to do that through the NALP directory, or you can have your resume passed along by somebody at the firm. And finally, the other option is simply to go on the firm's website and apply through their portal. Not every firm has an online portal, though. So you've got to read the instructions on the website under the tab that sort of discusses summer associate hiring to figure out what each firm's unique application procedure is. Historically, 3 universities in Canada have had on-campus interview processes take place where firms from New York will actually actively come to solicit applications from students in Canada, and that has been through U of T, Osgoode, and McGill. In recent years, I've actually only heard about U of T continuing the on-campus interview process, but please make note, even that is not a guarantee of a job. The reason is the OCIs really don't take place until the end of July. And what did we just say? Offers are given on a rolling admission basis starting in May, June. You don't actually want to wait, even for schools like U of T, Osgoode, and McGill, all of which are in the room today. You do not want to wait for OCIs to apply to some of these firms. You should be applying independently and directly right away. I know plenty of U of T students, for example, who already had interviews and offers in hand prior to the OCI process taking place. Why is that? Not every New York firm will be coming to campus. If you Google right now, Vault 100 New York, you will see a list of 100 firms that you could conceivably apply to. The number of firms that even participate in OCIs is maybe 10 to 15. What you want to do is take this process into your own hands right away. Go on the Vault 100 website, make an Excel spreadsheet with those 100 firms, and do your research on when their portals open up and who to apply to, which HR person to apply to, and actually start just cold submitting and emailing your resume and application to HR or via the portal based on the date they provide. The other thing you want to Google right now is NALP, N-A-L-P directory, and then enter the firm name. So for example, if you see Davis Polk on the Vault 100 list of firms, and you type in Google NALP directory Davis Polk, immediately what will come up is the name of the recruitment, the legal talent officer that you should send your application to, the address of the firm, and the website link to their online portal. So the NALP directory combined with the Vault 100 website is your best friend in this process. Any questions about that so far? Okay, let's continue. So that's entry point number 1. I want to talk a little bit about hiring trends at this juncture before we go into the other steps. So based on the information I've been able to gather, and this is generalized information I've been able to gather, the market has softened in New York compared to previous years. There was a huge uptake in associates in pre-COVID and right around COVID, so 19, 20, 21, that has softened a little bit. Okay, so there aren't as many summer associates being hired, but there's still a significantly higher volume than in Canada. For example, a top-tier New York firm will take in anywhere between 50 and 250 summer associates every year. By contrast, Toronto firms or even Vancouver firms with large hiring numbers will take about 20 to 30. This is a 10x increase in New York. And there's not 10 firms or 20 firms, there's over 100. So you would be crazy not to apply to New York, given the sheer likelihood of obtaining a job based on numbers alone. We all know that there are plenty of A+++ candidates in Canada who have applied to Toronto or Ottawa or Calgary or Vancouver firms and haven't ended up with jobs. That simply doesn't happen in New York. If you're a good candidate, you're not going to fall through the cracks based on a lack of numbers or based on not having enough spots. New York has plenty. If you're a good candidate and you've got, the wherewithal to go and network and really push and advocate for yourself, there's absolutely no way you're not going to get something. If you're a mediocre candidate or a poor candidate, you're really going to have to push, and there's no guarantee at that point. But you don't have the same issue with, we just didn't have enough spots, but we loved you, which is what Canadian firms have said to good candidates in the past. If a New York firm likes you, they have room for you, as long as you apply early enough, okay? Pre-recruiting is a term that you'll hear a lot when it comes to the New York recruit, and that is also on the rise. Pre-recruiting is basically the process of firms courting top candidates before formalized interviews have happened. So for example, if you were to fly out to New York at the end of the exam period to set up coffee chats to meet with people at firms and they liked you, for example, let's say you met a couple associates in New York or a couple partners and they liked you, these partners or associates might say, let's schedule you for a pre-interview prior to the actual formalized process starting, or let me send your application details over to HR and flag it for them as one of our preferred candidates. So these candidates will be interviewed first, possibly even earlier than the official interview start time that the firm has set, and they will already be extending you an offer prior to their formal intake process happening. So in other words, there's room for you to negotiate your entry. Unlike the Canadian process, which says sit tight, cross your fingers or your hands in your lap and wait till you're told to get up and start moving, New York is like, hey, if you want us, we're here. Show us what you got. Fly down, shake some hands, get your application in front of us, make a case for yourself. If we like you, we won't even wait until we're actually officially open for business. We will take you now. So there's room to play here. There is room for you to make opportunities happen. There's room for you to open doors. New York fundamentally rewards hustle. This is where being resourceful and relentless actually comes into play. The complete opposite is the case with the Canadian recruits. You are not rewarded for submitting things early because they simply won't be looked at before the actual recruitment timelines open. And this is because of the strict provincial law society requirements. That was done away with in 2018 in New York, where firms could guide and direct the course of their recruitment periods however they wanted. This gives an advantage to any good candidate willing to take a chance and really advocate for themselves. For all of these reasons, I am highly, highly recommending that you do not wait for a resume collect process to take place or for OCIs to happen in July for those schools that have that process. It is way too late in the game. Your application materials need to be in by end of May at the latest. Because of this rolling basis, Wild West, no timeline mentality that New York is operating with. Is that clear? Can I get a thumbs up? Is all of that clear? I want to see a couple thumbs. I need to know if you guys are here and with me. You can even put it as an emoji at the top of the screen. Is this making sense? Quiet room today. We'll continue on. If you have questions, let me know. Recent hiring trends. I just wanted to show you some of the firms that hired in the last New York recruit from the University of Toronto, which is the school that seems to collect the most data around the New York recruit. Take a screenshot of this, take a note of this. These firms do appear in the Vault 100. We've got Sullivan and Cromwell, Paul Weiss, Davis Polk, Kirkland and Ellis, Sidley Austin, Freshfields, Mayor Brown, Milbank, Paul Hastings, Proskauer Rose, Steptoe Johnson, and White and Case. Aiken Gump isn't on here, but that should be added too, along with Wilson Sonsini and Pillsbury. Okay, so there are a lot of firms from that Vault 100 that do have, that do hire Canadians. The reason I'm pointing these firms out is that you have a better chance of getting hired at a firm that has a track record already of hiring Canadians than a firm that's never done it before. Okay, so keep that in mind. The other thing to take note of is this, and this is sort of interesting. While it is the case that generally the hiring market has softened over the last year or two, you'll notice that even for U of T students, that number of students who, the percentage of graduating students going to New York has actually increased. What this means is that for good candidates, there's always uptake. Even if the general trend is to hire fewer people, this doesn't mean you have a lower chance of being hired if you're a good candidate. Is that clear? A good candidate will always find a place in New York. So don't worry if the market's really hot or the market's soft. People who are competitive are going to be competitive in any market. So you want to sort of make the assessment and talk to people and find out, am I competitive? Is this worth applying to? And we will get to that today. Are there any questions about these numbers? In 2019, 2020, when the market was hot, we only saw 8 or 9% of U of T grads going to New York. In the market that's been a little bit softer in 2022 and 2023, we see double that. That's the trend I'm talking about, that there's always a place for good candidates. Here's some student feedback. Cameron, do you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask whether the fact that it's increasing in New York, in your opinion, is that just because the survivability of the market is greater in New York, or is there some other reason? Is demand up in New York, for example?
No, so the point that I'm trying to make is that demand is not up in New York. And yet the number of students going has increased. So when I tell you the market has softened, this is not to dissuade anyone from applying. It's simply to tell you that you have to make a better case for yourself than you might have in previous years. You could be a B candidate during a hot market and get a job. Here you'd need to be a B+ candidate to get a job. But yeah, but the reason we're seeing the increase, and that's a great question, the reason we're seeing the increase in uptake is because of the 5 reasons I gave you. More students like yourself are catching on to the fact that there is a huge incentive to go to New York. And New York itself is getting more familiar with how strong the Canadian student market is. I don't know if you know this, but there are a lot of law schools in Canada. There's in the US, there's probably over 100, whereas in Canada, there's only about 20 law schools. And amongst the law schools, there is a very consistent caliber of students. So the caliber of students coming out of Ottawa and Queens and Western and Osgoode and U of T and McGill are much, much more evenly matched than, say, the top 14 law schools in the US versus the law school 50 to 100 in the US. So New York firms are actually looking at the top 20 firms primarily to hire from in New York, and then they come to Canada because we have more in common with the top 20 firms than firm 30 to 50 to 100 has with the top 20 in the US. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Canadians,
that's
yeah,
really good insight.
yeah, Canadians have a higher caliber overall in terms of performance in New York. So New York has an appetite for Canadians that's irrespective of the softening of the market. And Canadians are also are expressing more interest in New York. So that's where these numbers come from. Thank you for the question, Cameron. Charmaine.
Hi, Hannah. I've really been appreciating the insight and all of the information that you've been providing, because a lot of what you've shared is not information that's easily available or that people would typically think of, or even have access to the know-how. So thank you for that. My question, given the topic of today's discussion, and referring specifically to slide 13, I know you stated that there were, I think, 3 other firms that should have been added to that chart. And so my question was just if you could add those 3 other firms in the chat.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I would recommend that if anyone thinking of applying to the firms goes to the Vault 100 New York website, because there's a lot more there. When U of T does their collection of data around who's being hired, they're only looking at U of T students. So that's what this represents. But the firms that I'm giving you are ones I know for a fact other Canadian students have ended up at. So these are now in the chat. They were Pillsbury, Aiken Gump, Wilson Sonsini, and actually another one is Gunderson Detmer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Charmaine. Seeing no other questions at this time, we'll move forward. And I want to give you the student feedback that's come up around students like yourself who have gone through the New York application process. I know it can feel intimidating. I know it can seem a bit daunting, but here's something that should comfort you. So many students who were surveyed actually expressed their preference for the New York recruitment process over the Toronto recruit, which, by the way, is very similar to the Calgary, Vancouver, Ottawa recruits in terms of their rigidity. Here are some of the comments that they had to say. The New York recruit experience was significantly better than the Toronto recruit. Pre-OCI's lack of first choice language, the ability to network between the first round or screener interview and in-call interviews, more possible interview dates, and more time to decide on an offer made the experience smoother. What this first comment is referring to is the fact that in the Canadian recruitment process, the odds are stacked against you as candidates. You are pressured for first choice language. You are only given 24 hours to accept an offer. You're given weird signals where firms can't tell you where you stand or how much they really like you. And you can be cut at any moment without any real measure of recourse. In New York, interviews can happen at any time. They give you, on average, 21 days to make a decision. They don't pressure you into an answer right away, and there's no game playing. They tell you if they like you, they give you an offer if they like you, and they even give you 3 weeks to decide and to shop around at other firms so you can make a reasonable comparison. There is no pressure for first choice language, and you get to decide when you're going to fly down to see them. It's not all chunked in to a 3 or 4 day recruitment period where you're having to cut firms from your interview list because you simply don't have room. You can interview at every single firm in New York that you get an interview spot with. So the power balance is restored in your favor. That's what this comment is talking about. The other 2 echo the same idea. Overall, the experience was like 100,000 times better than the 1L recruit, and I appreciated that the offers weren't 24-hour exploding offers, so that I could actually ask real, meaningful, tough questions before making my decision. Just to let you guys know, I had 6 offers on the table from 6 different firms in New York when I was there. I eliminated 4 simply by talking to people. And the top 2 firms that I was having trouble deciding between, which were Cravath and Sullivan and Cromwell, those firms actually flew me down for a second round of meet and greets so that I could ask more questions, get to know the firm. They took me out for lunch, took me out for dinner, showed me around New York. I got a chance to actually get to know them before making a final decision. So it was a very reassuring, very respectful process in which I felt incredibly valued, which is very different in some ways from the experience in Canada. So it's really, really an enjoyable process. I highly recommend you consider it. And it's not nearly as intimidating or as high pressured as the Canadian recruit because the power is restored in your favor. Here's some other pre-recruitment period points of feedback. I secured my position through networking and applying outside the formal recruit. I got a job during the pre-recruit. I received 4 offers through the pre-recruit and ended up declining all of my OCI offers. So again, Getting started early is the better way to go, and you can create jobs for yourself simply by networking. So do your research, go on the Vault 100, make sure you reach out to HR early, and even a mediocre candidate who shows tremendous initiative and actually engages in networking can make a case for why they should be hired and get hired simply by the sheer number of available spots in New York compared to Canada. So we've talked about the 2L summer recruitment process. The other way to get to New York is through the first year associate intake. Now listen, this is not a formalized recruitment process, but if you are in 3L and you are regretting that you didn't get a chance to apply to New York in 2L or were somehow not successful, it doesn't mean you still can't get to New York. In your 3L year, it is perfectly acceptable for you to call up New York firms, even fly down and meet with them and say, listen, I didn't summer at your firm, but I'm very interested in starting with you upon graduation. Here are my grades, here are my extracurriculars, here's what I bring to the table. And by a process of networking and simply knocking on doors and making a case for yourself, you can open up a job. And I've seen a number of students who perhaps didn't have the grades coming out of 1L dramatically improve their grades through 2L, and then go and knock on the doors of New York firms and say, look, I'm not the candidate I was last year. I've done a lot more in terms of leadership. I've pulled up my grades. I'm ready to hit the ground running. I've taken courses in corporate law, and I want to be at your firm. And they've actually landed jobs for themselves. So there is no standardized recruitment process. There's no formalized intake. You're just going to have to submit applications directly to HR or apply to job postings that appear. What is required if you're going to go and knock on doors and attempt this process independently is to have your transcript ready, resume, and if you have any references from professors, sometimes firms want to see that as well. The key to getting a job as a 3L student who wants a first-year associate position is to be able to demonstrate that you have the transferable skills to make it in New York. The reason this is so important is because they don't get a chance to test drive you over the summer. So you're going to have to give them a compelling case without them being able to preview you over a summer that you belong at that firm. So demonstrate all the transferable skills you have either from a summer of corporate work experience or from legal clinics or from past work experiences prior to law school. You must also emphasize heavily networking. And if any of your friends in your class landed jobs in New York for the summer, you want them to introduce you to who they worked with. Anyone who can vouch for you personally in the firm is going to make a better case on your behalf, rather than someone who says, met with this person, coffee chatted once, here you go. That's a very different thing from someone saying, I've been in class with this person for 2 years. They're an excellent student. You know, I trust them. I would definitely want to work with them. They'd be a great culture fit. Having that kind of testimonial on your behalf will make incredible strides for you internally. Firms also love to hire people who fit with other people they've hired. And so that's one of the basically the gates that you'll have to jump over. And an internal testimonial from someone who's already been hired confirms for them that you would be a good culture fit. Now, for those who, for example, decide to do, let's say you don't get New York and you do the 2L summer recruit, but you do land at a Toronto firm. You can speak to your corporate experience in Toronto during your 2L summer when you knock on the doors of New York firms in 3L. You can say, hey, I summered at Blake's last year. I got tons of great work experience that would be directly related to the kinds of work I would do at your firm. Blake's, even if they don't know your law school, they'll know the name of the firm. And so you can trade off the brand of the firm you spent time at. Or if you're someone like me who spent their 2L summer, or rather, I was in the JD MBA program, so I spent my 1L summer technically at the Bank of Montreal doing capital markets work. Although I came from U of T, even if I'd come from a less well-known law school, the law firms in New York know what the Bank of Montreal is. So if I did a great job at the Bank of Montreal, they know that another institution has put their stamp of credibility on me. So I get to trade off the strength of that brand name when I'm applying. You want to make sure you're dropping high quality brand names to these firms, especially if they're not familiar with your law school. Does that make sense? Thumbs up. Does that make sense? Everyone clear? Perfect. Okay. The final way to get to New York is through a lateral transfer. Let's say, for example, you landed a summer job at a corporate law firm in Canada, anywhere. Let's say it's, McCarthy's. You decide you want to article at McCarthy's, you're enjoying your time there, but the money or it just isn't, enough. Or you decide, I don't want to miss out on the opportunity for New York. I wanted to article in Canada, but now I see that my future is somewhere else. You can lateral either after articling or as a mid-level associate over to New York. The reason is because the attrition rate in New York is sufficiently high after year 2 and 3 that there's a big dearth at the middle section. There's a lot of mid-level associates that are missing from a lot of these firms. So there's a high level of first years, second years, and third years at New York firms, but a lot of people quit or decide to go in-house or change career trajectories after 3 years. So if you're a 4th year, 5th year, or 6th year mid-level associate, there's a huge need for those in New York. So you can either lateral right after articling and begin as a first-year associate, or you can wait for the mid-level lateral transfer. What I will say is that it is always better to go to New York earlier in your career rather than later for 2 reasons. Number one, the training you get from day 1 will be categorically more rigorous and at a better level of quality. So you want to get that training early. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you come from Canada and you are a 4th year, 5th year, or 6th year associate, New York doesn't always recognize those years of work. Because you don't have US specific work experience, they may actually drop you down to a 3rd year instead of being a 4th year or a 5th year. If you're a 6th year, you might get dropped to a 4th year position or a 5th year position. They won't consider you a 5th or 6th year equivalent in the US. So you'll be dropped down a couple years of seniority. That won't be the case if you just start in New York. So earlier is always better. The associates that are most likely to be successful in lateraling to New York will be on the corporate transactional side. So mergers and acquisitions, private equity, capital markets, corporate governance, corporate finance, these are the areas that New York hires the most around. The exception to this is if you were clerked at an Ontario or a federal court, a provincial court or a federal court, or if you clerked for the Supreme Court and you decide you want to go to New York under the litigation side, every firm will have their doors open to you because clerkships are considered extremely prestigious in the US. But short of a clerkship lateral move, you should really be looking at the transactional side because a 3rd year litigator in Canada is not going to be as attractive as a 3rd year corporate associate lateraling over to New York, simply because litigation is much more jurisdiction specific. New York is going to grill you hard on why you want to move over there. So you're going to need a good, compelling narrative and reason for why you're done with Canada and why you're ready to move to New York. The timing of the market is also essential because there's always going to be a need for intake in the 2L recruit, but laterals are on a needs basis only. No firm is going to take you unless there is a need for an associate. And there typically is because that mid-level piece is usually quite thin, but you'll still have to make a strong case and you'll have to time the market. Some people will choose to work with headhunters who identify where the openings are. Headhunters are paid for by the firms, not by you, so it can be helpful, but I highly recommend having a coach as well to help you identify whether the firm is the right fit for you. A headhunter only wants you to land a job. They really don't care where or whether you're happy. They want you to just land somewhere. Whereas having someone like a coach can help you decide whether a firm is the right fit or whether you're going to send the headhunter back to the drawing board to look at more firms that have a better culture fit for you. The other thing to note about lateral transfers are that some firms have a no-go policy around it. So if your dream is to work at Cravath or Sullivan and Cromwell, some of these firms say that unless you were born and bred and raised at our firm as a summer or a first-year associate level, we do not want you. The exception to this is if you have a very unique specialized skill set or a very unique set of networks and relationships that they happen to need, but it is extremely, extremely rare. So some firms won't even accept a lateral. And they anticipate hiring more juniors to ensure their mid-levels have a robust number because they simply won't add people from the outside. They want to train you from the beginning. Other firms are much more flexible about accepting laterals. So just be aware that not every firm is going to be available to you if you don't get in there from the ground level. Okay.